You don't forget the smell of a flood. It ain't just wet earth and rot. It's the smell of 1,000 things losing their place in the world. It's the smell of a house exhaling its last breath. And when that water's up to your chest with a shivering child on your back, it's the smell of a clock that's about to stop ticking. I was just a rancher out fixing a fence that had no business being broken when I heard the sound that cut through the roar of the water. Not a scream, but a whisper. A boy, no older than 14, nomming the stars for his little sister so she wouldn't be afraid of the dark water that was trying to swallow them whole. And I knew, right then, that my life had just split in two, the life before I heard that whisper and the life after. I've got a bad habit of talking to my horse. It's a lonely life, ranching, and a horse is a good listener. He doesn't judge you when you curse the sky for not raining, and he doesn't interrupt when you're figuring out the price of hay. So on that Tuesday, I was having a full-blown conversation with old Tom about the ornery fence post that had decided to give up the ghost, when the first fat drops of rain hit my hat. "Well," I said to Tom, giving the stubborn post a final kick, "looks like the sky's about to join the conversation." That was an understatement. The sky didn't join the conversation. It declared war. In a matter of hours, the dry creek bed that ran along my property line, the one I'd never even seen so much as a puddle in, had become a churning, brown, malevolent river. The rain was biblical, a solid sheet of water that turned the world into a watercolor painting run amok. I got the cattle to high ground, a task that felt like trying to herd a bunch of stubborn clouds, and then just sat on the porch of my cabin, watching the world drown. That's when I heard it. Just a sound at first, a faint, high-pitched keening that was almost lost in the roar of the storm. I figured it was an animal, a calf separated from its mother, or maybe a mountain lion swept down from the hills. I grabbed my rope and a heavy canvas coat and slogged out into the downpour, old Tom following behind me like a wet, disgruntled shadow. I was soaked through in seconds, the water biting cold against my skin. The keening got louder as I got closer to the creek, which was now a raging torrent of mud and debris. I could barely see a thing. I wiped the water from my eyes, and that's when I saw them, clinging to the collapsed roof of a tiny wooden shed. It must have been an old line shack, the kind of place a sheepherder might have used decades ago. The water was swirling around it, clawing at its foundations, and on top of it were two shapes, a boy and a smaller bundle in his arms. The scream that tore from my throat was primal. "Hang on, I'm coming." I don't think they heard me. I was 50 yards away, separated by that impossible current. I looked for a way around, a safer point to cross, but the flood had remade the land. Everything was water. Then the shed lurched. I saw the boy grab the edge of the roof, saw him lose his grip, and then with a sickening crack the whole structure collapsed, swallowed by the brown maw of the river. My heart just stopped. I was frozen, a useless lump of a man watching two kids die. But then I saw him. A dark head bobbing in the water, his arms wrapped around something. He was fighting, kicking with all his might, his face a mask of sheer animal terror. The flood was dragging him downstream, straight into a snarl of uprooted cottonwood trees. My brain finally kicked into gear. I mounted old Tom, though the idea of riding a horse into a flood seemed like the dumbest thing in the world, and spurred him forward. We raced along the bank, trying to get ahead of him. Tom was smarter than me. He skittered to a halt at a spot where the bank was higher and the water was choked with debris. I jumped off, grabbed my rope, and made a loop. It was a horrible shot. The boy was 40 feet away, struggling to keep his sister's head above water. I had one chance. I said a silent prayer to a God I hadn't spoken to in years, and I threw the rope. It landed perfectly, the loop slipping over the boy's head and shoulders. I yelled for Tom to back up, and the horse, God bless his stubborn hide, dug his hooves in. The rope went taut and the boy was yanked through the water, his face slamming into a floating log before he was pulled free. Tom was braced, his muscles straining, a living anchor. I pulled the rope, hand over hand, until I could reach the boy, his little sister, and drag them both out of the water. The boy was unconscious, his face a gash of blood and mud. He was so light. I laid him on the grass, terrified, and flipped him onto his back, not daring to look at the girl he'd been carrying. I started chest compressions, the rhythm a frantic, desperate prayer. I did it for what felt like hours, my own hands shaking. Then, with a gush of water that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth, the boy coughed, sputtered, and threw up half the river onto my boots. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and then they snapped into focus. My sister, he rasped, his voice like gravel. Where's Chell? His name was Mateo. The girl was Chell, his little sister, and she wasn't moving. Her color was wrong. She was pale, far too pale. All the stories I'd heard about heroes and rescues didn't say anything about this part. The part where you just stare at a lifeless child and feel the weight of a universe that's supposed to be fair, but just isn't. Mateo scrambled to his knees, his whole body shaking. He didn't even look at me. He just pushed my hands away and started working on his sister. He was crying, but his movements were precise, almost mechanical. Please, Chell, please, he whispered, a mantra, a prayer, a command all at once. Please, 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 please. He did what I had done for him, the chest compressions, the breaths, but I could see his strength fatting. His small frame was racked with shivers and his arms were trembling. I can't, I'm not doing it right, he sobbed, looking at me with such desperation that it broke something inside of me. Let me, I said, my voice thick. I can do it. I took over, trying to remember the paramedics demonstration from a first aid class I'd taken 10 years ago. The hands were to press on the breastbone, hard and fast. I could hear the crack of a rib in my memory, but I didn't care. I felt like I was pushing against a bag of rocks. There was no life there, but I was a stubborn old rancher, and I wasn't ready to give up on this little girl. Then Mateo touched my arm. Stop. I looked at him, confused. We can't stop, we have to keep trying. There's no pulse, she's gone. The words hit me like a physical blow. He was right. The gentle rise and fall of her chest, which I'd just convinced myself I'd seen, hadn't been there at all. It was just my eyes playing tricks on me, my own desperate imagination. I looked at him, this boy who had just saved himself, who had fought through a flood to protect his sister, and he was now telling me to stop because he knew something I didn't. Your parents, I stammered, trying to find something, anything to say. Where are your parents? We need to get you home. The question seemed to shake him from his trance. He looked around at the rain, at the churning brown river, at his sister's still form, as if seeing it all for the first time. Then he looked at me with something in his eyes that wasn't despair. It was a terrible, cold calm. They're gone, he said, his voice flat. The flood, it took the house, it took everything. In that moment, I saw the full weight of what he was carrying. Not just his sister's body, but the memory of his home dissolving into the brown water, the sound of his parents being swept away, the crushing loneliness of a world that had just been ripped out from under him. He was an island in a sea of loss, and I was just a rancher who didn't have the words to build a bridge. We didn't have a funeral. The whole valley was a funeral. The rain stopped just before dusk, leaving a world that was muddy, gray, and silent. I took Mateo and Chell back to my cabin. I tried to treat Chell's body with respect. I laid her on my bed, wrapped her in a clean blanket, and closed her eyes. She looked like a little porcelain doll, not a real girl. It was easier that way. It was easier to pretend she was just sleeping. I built a fire, even though it was the middle of June, because Mateo wouldn't stop shivering. I made him some coffee, the only thing I knew how to make that was warm and strong. He just sat there, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring at the fire. He didn't say anything. I wanted him to talk, to scream, to cry. But he was a stone, a solid, unmovable mass of grief. I learned a few things about him over the next hour, just from the sparse things he said. His name was Mateo Apache. His parents had moved from the reservation, trying to find work in the small town down the valley. They'd been poor, but they'd been a family. That was all gone now. Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. When the rain stops, what do we do? I didn't have an answer for him. I had a few cattle left, a small cabin, and a horse. How was I supposed to take care of a kid who just lost everything? I looked at my hands, cracked and calloused from years of hard work, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely useless. We stayed like that for a while, the silence between us heavy with unspoken grief. I was just about to suggest he try to get some sleep when there was a knock at the door. It was a sharp, impatient sound. I opened it to find a man on my porch. He was no taller than me, but he had the kind of presence that made a room feel smaller. He was dressed in jeans and a denim jacket with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. A cowboy through and through, but he didn't look like any rancher I'd ever seen. His face was weathered and tanned, but it was his eyes that caught me. They were the color of the winter sky, a pale, piercing blue that seemed to see right through you. He was carrying a worn leather bag slung over his shoulder. "Name's Cole," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I was up in the hills when the storm hit, saw your smoke, figured you might have a cup of coffee for a tired man." I should have told him to go to hell. A stranger, showing up out of nowhere, wanting to share my fire when I was trying to deal with the dead body of a little girl in my bed and a traumatized boy in my chair. But there was something about him that made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way he stood there, completely unbothered by the mud and the cold, like he'd seen it all 100 times before. Or maybe I was just so tired, so bone-deep tired, that I couldn't muster the energy to be inhospitable. "Coffee's on the stove," I grunted, stepping aside to let him in. Cole walked inside, surveying the room with a single sweeping glance. He saw Mateo first, the boy shivering in his blanket. Then his gaze shifted to the closed door of my bedroom where Chell lay. He didn't say anything, but I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He walked over to the fire, took off his hat, and sat down across from Mateo as if he'd been there 100 times before. He poured himself a cup of coffee, took a long sip, and then spoke to Mateo. "That's a heavy thing you're carrying, son." Mateo flinched, looking at me with a startled expression. He hadn't said a word about Chell to anyone but me. How could this stranger know? But Cole just nodded toward the bedroom door. "I can smell it," he said, his voice matter of fact. "Death, it has a scent, and it clings to a person." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This wasn't just some cowboy caught in the rain. He was something else. Something I didn't understand. But before I could ask him to leave, he pulled out a small leather pouch from his bag and placed it on the table. He didn't explain what it was. He just put it there between him and Mateo, as if it was a sacred offering. "I was with the Apache in another life," Cole said, his eyes fixed on Mateo. "The real ones, the ones in the mountains. I learned a few things from them. They believe that when a person dies, their spirit gets lost. It doesn't know where to go. It wanders, looking for a way back to the people it loves." He paused, taking another sip of his coffee. "Usually it finds its way on its own, but sometimes it needs a little help." I watched Mateo's face. For the first time since I'd pulled him from the water, I saw something other than that terrible calm. It was a flicker of emotion, a mixture of fear and the faintest glimmer of hope. "How?" Mateo whispered. Cole didn't answer. He just looked at me, his pale eyes boring into mine. "You rancher, you got a good heart. You wouldn't have pulled these two from the river if you didn't, but we can't help her. The girl is gone, but the boy, this one." He pointed a leathery finger at Mateo. "He's got a path to walk, a hard one, and he can't do it with a ghost clinging to his back." It was the strangest thing I'd ever heard, and the most unsettling. I opened my mouth to tell him to get out, to tell him he was a crazy old coot, when Mateo stood up. He was shaking, but there was a new resolve in his posture. "My parents," he said, his voice trembling, "are they lost too?" Cole looked at him for a long moment. "That's a different kind of loss, son. Their path is their own, but your sister, she's still here, she's attached to you, she's confused. She doesn't know why you let go." Mateo's face crumpled. I couldn't, it was the water." "I know," Cole said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. "I know, but she doesn't. She just knows you're the only thing left from her life. So she's staying. And as long as she stays, you'll never be able to move on. You'll be like a tree with its roots in a dead riverbed. Nothing new will grow. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a handful of something dark and dry. Dried sage, I realized. The smell hit me like a wave. It was a sharp, pungent smell that I recognized from a flea market a long time ago, sold by a woman who claimed to be a healer. I'd thought it was a bunch of hokum. But watching Cole, watching the way he held his hands over the sage, I wasn't so sure anymore. "You don't have to believe, boy," Cole said, addressing Mateo. "Your belief isn't what's important. What's important is love. You love your sister, right? More than anything." Mateo nodded, a tear finally escaping his eye. "Then you have to set her free," Cole said, his voice low and urgent. "Your love is keeping her here in this place between worlds. It's not a kindness, it's a cage." He handed the bundle of sage to Mateo. "Take this, go to her, sit with her, remember her, tell her all the good things, the jokes she told, the songs you sang, and then tell her goodbye, tell her to go to the light, tell her you'll be okay. You have to mean it, son, you have to believe it." I felt like an intruder in my own home. I should have stopped it. This was a kid dealing with trauma, and this stranger was filling his head with mystical nonsense. But I was rooted to the spot. Something in Cole's eyes, something ancient and knowing, held me captive. Mateo took the bundle of sage, his small fingers trembling. He walked toward the bedroom door, his footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Mr. Hayes," he said, not turning around, "thank you for everything." He disappeared into the room, closing the door behind him. I turned to Cole, my voice a low, angry hiss. "What the hell did you just do? What kind of sick game is this?" "Listen to me, rancher," Cole said, his eyes flashing. "You think I'm here by accident. You think the storm was an accident. Everything happens for a reason. The boy lost his parents, he lost his home. He needs a place to heal, a place to grow, not a ghost to drag him down into the mud with her." "We don't even know who you are," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "You just show up, spouting nonsense, telling a kid to say goodbye to his dead sister like it's some kind of therapy." "Who I am doesn't matter," Cole said, his voice softening. "What matters is what I'm offering. A chance for that boy to have a future. You think he can do that here, with you? You're a kind man, Hayes, but you're a rancher, not a father. You don't have the first clue how to raise a child." The words stung because they were true. My life was a string of lonely days and lonely nights. I had no family, no wife, no children. What the hell did I know about raising a boy? As if on cue, the bedroom door creaked open. Mateo stepped out. His face was streaked with tears, but his eyes were different. The terrible cold calm was gone. In its place was a raw, aching grief that was almost unbearable to look at. But there was also a strange peace about him. He walked over to Cole and me, his steps unsteady. "Did she go?" Cole asked, his voice soft. Mateo nodded. "I told her I loved her, I told her it was okay, and then I felt her go. It was like a warmth spreading through me, and then nothing, just me." My breath caught in my throat. I was a practical man, a man of the land and of the hard, cold facts of life. I didn't believe in spirits or ghosts or whatever that was supposed to be, but seeing Mateo stand there, seeing the transformation in his face, I couldn't explain it. I couldn't dismiss it. Cole stood up, picking up his bag. "I'll be on my way then. You did well, son. She's at peace now. The land will be what it is, and the sky will be what it is, and you'll both be okay. It'll take time, but you will." He walked to the door, then paused and looked back at me. "And you, rancher, don't let the fear of the unknown stop you from doing the right thing. The boy needs a home. More than that, he needs a family. You can give him that if you have the courage." And then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. The next morning I buried Chell. I found a spot on the hill behind the cabin, a place where the sun would always find her first. The earth was soft and easy to dig. I didn't have a preacher, but I said a few words myself. Something about a brave girl who was loved by her brother. It felt inadequate, but it was all I had. Mateo stood by the grave, clutching a bundle of wildflowers I'd found growing by the creek bank, a stubborn little patch of white that had somehow survived the flood. He was silent again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This was a quiet grief, a peaceful acceptance. He laid the flowers on the mound of fresh dirt, and then he looked at me. "What now, Mr. Hayes?" The question, the same one he'd asked the night before, hung in the air between us. I could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of being alone. I thought about my empty house, my lonely life. I thought about the heavy burden he was carrying, and the heavy burden I'd been carrying for years without even knowing it. "Well," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I was thinking, my house is too big for one old man, and my horse, old Tom, he's been getting lazy. He needs someone young and spry to keep him on his toes." I looked at the boy, his dark eyes searching mine. "And I was also thinking, I've got a lot of stories to tell, and I could use a good listener." Mateo's face, which had been so pale and drawn, seemed to catch a little of the morning sun. A ghost of a smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a happy smile, not yet, but it was a start. It was a seed. "You'd let me stay?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Really, with you?" "I don't know about let," I said, scratching the back of my neck, a nervous habit I'd never been able to shake. "I was thinking more like, we could figure it out together. It's gonna be hard, son. I can't replace your parents. I'm not smart enough or kind enough or young enough, but I can teach you to ride a horse, and I can make a mean pot of chili, and I'll listen. I'll always listen." Mateo didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at me, his gaze searching and vulnerable. Then he did something that surprised me. He took a step forward and wrapped his thin arms around my waist, pressing his face into my old canvas coat. I felt his small body shake with a sob he'd been holding in for what felt like forever. I stood there, stiff and awkward for a moment. I wasn't a man who was good with hugs, but then I let my arms fall around him, holding him close. I could feel the last of his resistance crumbling, giving way to a raw, healing grief. The rest of the summer was a blur. I taught Mateo how to ride old Tom, and the boy had a natural touch with horses that I envied. He was patient and gentle, whispering to the animal in a language I didn't understand, a language that seemed to come from a place deep inside him. I taught him to mend fences, to chop wood, to check for cattle with a bum leg. He was a quick learner, and the work seemed to take his mind off the heavy thoughts I knew were still there, lurking just beneath the surface. We didn't talk about the night Cole came. We didn't talk about the flood or his parents or Chell. We talked about the weather, the price of hay, the best way to skin a rabbit. It was mundane, ordinary stuff, but it was our life. It was a life we were building together, day by day, fence post by fence post. One evening we were sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the mountains. It was a beautiful sunset, all shades of orange and purple. Mateo was quiet, his eyes focused on the horizon. "What do you think it's like?" he asked, his voice soft and thoughtful. "After, when you're gone?" I paused, my hands resting on my knees. I wasn't sure how to answer. I thought about my own parents, long gone, about the land that held their bones. "I don't know, son. I've never been there, but I figure it's like the river. It's always moving, always changing, and you just gotta trust the current." Mateo nodded, seeming to accept my answer. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Mr. Hayes." "Yeah. Do you think she's watching, my sister? Do you think she can see us?" I thought about the legend Cole had spoken of, the lost spirit that needed to be set free. I'd never been a man of faith. I was a man of the land, of the hard, undeniable truth of things. But I'd seen something in Mateo's face that night, a peace that couldn't be faked. And I'd felt something shift in the air, a weight being lifted. Maybe it was just a boy letting go of his grief, or maybe it was something more. "I don't know for sure," I said, putting my arm around his shoulders. "But I like to think she is. She's up there with your folks watching over you, and she's proud of you. She's damn proud." He leaned his head against my shoulder, and I felt the tension leave his body. It was a quiet moment, a simple moment, but it was everything. It was the moment I realized that I hadn't just saved a boy from a flood. He had saved me from a life of quiet loneliness, of being nothing more than a crusty old rancher with a horse for a friend. It was the end of something, the end of the grief, the end of the fear, but it was also the beginning of something new, something that was more fragile and more precious than anything I had ever known. And as we sat there watching the stars blink to life in the darkening sky, I knew that Cole had been right. I had been given a chance, not just to help a boy, but to be a father, and I wasn't going to waste it. The future stretched out before us, uncertain and full of hard work. But for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to it.